cohesion.
en la
It
modernización y
identifies
diversificación productiva
action
de los sectores
areas in the
primarios y sus
diversification of
cadenas de valor,
primary sectors and their
fortalecimiento de
value
la
chains.
protección social, impulso al empleo
It
y
pushes
expansión en la infraestructura y servicios
jobs
de calidad
and the
para las
expansion
áreas
of
rurales.
infrastructure.
Reporte de Economía y Desarrollo. CAF,
Report on Economy
Banco
and
de Desarrollo
Development.
de América
CAF,
Latina y el
Development
Caribe.
Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. This is just a small part of everything that CAF represents. Round of applause. On behalf of CAF, so the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, I would like to welcome you to this launching of the report on economy and development, Roots of the Future, the new rural world of Latin America and the Caribbean. This event is being streamed in English and in Portuguese through the CAF webpage. The same goes for the YouTube channel. You can follow us on social media. We would like to thank the Ministry of Economy and, of course, the Colegio de México for hosting this event. This report highlights that sustainable development in the region depends on its rural territories, which are key for food security, jobs, and competitiveness. Apart from offering great opportunities for the energy transition and the leveraging of natural resources. In this encounter, we will be discussing the main challenges and opportunities, and we will give out recommendations as well as the roadmap to attract investment. Before we continue, we want to greet someone very special who's joining us, the Deputy Secretary for Latin America and the Caribbean of the Foreign Affairs Ministry. Welcome, Secretary. And to start, we would like to give the floor to Sergio Silva, the leader of the Economic Development Unit. Go ahead, Doctor. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Ministry of Economy. It is a great pleasure and an honor for me to receive the colleagues of CAF, our dear Ana Covarrubias. Welcome. For us, collaboration with these types of institutions, such as CAF, is crucial. It has great value. And it's not just about hosting great events, but producing knowledge, generating knowledge, understanding strategies, and understanding the goals of economic development, seen as a holistic matter that requires the participation not only of the Ministry of Economy, but really any other uh, agency in the federal government. It's something that requires continuous, honest, and open dialogue with academia, with the private sector, and it calls for action. Yesterday in the evening, we signed a collaboration agreement between CAF and the Ministry of Economy, and that really makes us very happy because we managed to consolidate what it is that we want to work on jointly. And so it is an honor to welcome you to this space. On behalf of the Ministry of Economy, welcome. And please feel at home. Whenever you feel like you need a space to have these conversations, you can always count on us. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us and welcome once again. Please um, feel at home. Thank you, Dr. Silva. Let us now continue with the opening session. We're going to give the floor to Alicia Montalvo, the Vice President of Alliances and Mobilization from CAF. Go ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you, Secretary, Director, and distinguished guests. On behalf of the Executive President of CAF, Sergio Díaz de Granados, who could not join us today because he's currently uh, looking to, he's dealing with other matters and had a last minute call. But on behalf of him, I would like to thank you for this invitation, and I have the honor to address you for the presentation of the 2026 Report on Economy and Development. This is the flagship report of this institution, and this time it focuses on something fundamental: rural development leading up to the future, with strategic reflection. Presenting this report in Mexico has a very special meaning. 36 years ago, Mexico became the first extra-regional partner in our institution as a representative for Latin America. This was no longer just an Andean organization, CAF. It was much broader and it was consolidating itself as a broader scope institution. This milestone was the basis of an exponential growth that has given the bank a greater scope of action and which allows it to be the first source of development financing in the region. Without a doubt, great projects foster in this land. And that connects with the main topic of the report, Roots of the Future, the new rural world of Latin America and the Caribbean. Two main figures of Mexican literature, Juan Ramon López Velarde and Juan Rulfo, expressed why the rural world matters. Homeland, your surface is corn, said Juan Rulfo. And here lies a fundamental truth. Mexico and Latin America and the Caribbean hold a great deal of their identity within their rural territories. And this is the main um, eh, uh, matter that brings the report on economy and development forward. The rural world can host strategic decisions that we cannot miss. We therefore need public policy that's well financed and well executed by institutions capable of sustaining the long term vision. And to translate this into transforming realities that push for prosperity and inclusion, the region has the support and knowledge and funding from CAF. The rural world matters today more than ever. And that's where most of our valuable assets are concentrated. Energy sources, critical minerals, agriculture, cultural heritage, but also in the rural world, the capacity of the region to produce sustainable foods is defined, as well as its capacity to foster sustainability and autonomy, as well as long-term growth. The potential of the rural world concentrates into three main axes. Firstly, a more productive agricultural landscape and a more integrated one. Number two, an intelligent insertion within the transition. And number three, a more diversified, sustainable, and inclusive agriculture. A crucial part of the future of the region has to do with more production, but also better production, with more innovation, more sustainability, and a more sophisticated production. Latin America and the Caribbean don't have to compete in volume only, but also in quality, traceability, reputation, and branding. I think of the cases of the meat from Uruguay, the cranberries of Peru, coffee in Colombia, those show that raw materials can convert into a global reference when there's strategic vision and positioning capacity. This is a fundamental lesson. The rural world does not only produce raw materials, it can also produce excellence, identity, and international prestige. There's also a wide a room to delve deeper into farming, aquaculture, etc. In a world that expands further and faster, Latin America and the Caribbean are a relevant actor. The region has critical materials such as lithium, copper, nickel, and rare earths. But the opportunity here lies in developing the value chains, capturing more added value, and preventing isolation so that the region is not just an exporter of primary resources. The rural world can feed the rest of the world, and it can also provide fuel for it. And this opportunity becomes even greater in our current international context, a context marked by geopolitical tensions and an increasing uncertainty in energy markets. It is within this scenario that the region can position itself as a relevant stakeholder in the markets of the future and also advance towards strategic autonomy, reduce vulnerabilities, and strengthen resilience. The potential also lies in areas relevant, such as aquaculture, fishing, forestry, rural tourism. All of that is covered in the report. Business nature-based business, in particular carbon credits, can become a new source of income for rural producers. But to translate all of this potential into sustained and transformative facts, we must consider a paradox that prevails throughout the region. We are a region with the capacity to feed the world, but a region that often hasn't managed to eradicate extreme poverty. For instance, the labor productivity of the region equals 12% than the one of the United States. We have the potential to overcome uh, high income countries, but we're not there yet. Currently, 60% of workers are informal. The advancement has not been enough. Poverty has declined by 30 points, yes, but it's still double the rate than in urban centers. There are also the technological and digital gaps that accrue to this issue. Apart from the straying away from agriculture when it comes to newer generations that don't see a profitable option of livelihood in agriculture because of several reasons, policies throughout time, institutionality. But what I want to make clear is that this is a lack of physical capital and better practices, from the use of fertilizers and water to the modernization of productive practices, and therefore the need to address three main issues. First, the barriers that are hurdling productivity. That requires us to advance in sustainable practices with a more efficient use of irrigation and fertilizers and incorporating technologies and biotechnologies even further. The second challenge has to do with the social, environmental, and territorial one. Economic growth does not ensure better quality of life for the inhabitants of the rural world. A significant part of the inequalities that exist in Latin America and the Caribbean have their origin in the gaps between territories. This is why rural development must come about in an integrated, holistic manner, placing at the center the reduction of historical a- asymmetries. There are now, in third place, there are still gaps in the access to basic services such as clean water, connectivity, roads, healthcare. These shortcomings affect rural households, but they also uh, hinder the access to markets and the development of labor. Access to financing, governance is necessary. How do we turn these priorities into an effective agenda? The report highlights the following. First, strengthening institutional capacities sub-nation-wide. The 2025 edition of the report covered the challenges that regional governments face, as well as the necessary actions to overcome them. It is crucial to improve technical and institutional capacities of these local governments and provide them with more tax autonomy. Now, the second point highlighted by the report has to do with regulatory frameworks and information. Without modern registries, there's no legal certainty. Without trustworthy data, there's no policy that can be designed. And without clear rules of the game, it's impossible to attract investment for this transformation. Lastly, but not least important, we have financing. Agricultural credit does not reach small producers. Uh, Research is marginal, less than 1% of the GDP. And subsidies do not concentrate in public goods such as infrastructure. That connects directly with CAF. We have concrete results in terms of productivity and well-being throughout the rural areas in the region, but we know that this is an even further challenge that needs to be, and solutions need to be scaled up. We also have a renewed agenda and with the right financial muscle to back it up. Between 2010 and 2024, the CAP approved for operations related to agricultural prosperity, and a new prosperity strategy was presented a year ago in Chile with a commitment to devote $8 billion up to 2030 to the agricultural sector. Among these initiatives, we find Mi Riego initiative in Colombia, Forestry Fund in Paraguay, that seek to recover degraded lands into forestry projects, engaging the public and private sectors. We also have public road projects, schooling projects, etc. What is to come? We have assumed the commitment to reach uh, $100 billion of investments by 2030, and 51% of those investments will be devoted to green financing. That uh, implies transformation of farming models to make them more resilient and sustainable. There are four main pillars for these actions. First, financing programs. We're going to finance a second level credit programs. And we're going to support the structuring of insurance against climate shocks. CAP will mobilize investment for the rural transition and for the great projects that will define the future of the region. Lithium, biofuels. CAP can operate as a financer or co-financer, guarantor, or structurer. For instance, the brine lithium projects that require $900 billion and a maturity of 9 years. Um, that fits the that fits our scope. Then we have financing for the rural infrastructure. 65% of CAF's portfolio is devoted to infrastructure. In the rural realm, this equals secondary net roads, um, feeder roads, water sanitation, a sustained development. And finally, we're going to continue to accompany governments in designing regulatory frameworks to facilitate all of these actions. We're talking about renewed frameworks, modernized rural records, and the engagement of several stakeholders, such as indigenous communities, academia, private and public sectors. This is not an endpoint, this is just a starting point. And today we are rooting the basis for a promising future in the region. Veronica Sancho's team has been working thoroughly, and she will be covering some of that today. We are planting the seeds of a new stage, and we know that this requires patience and care. The commitment of CAP is accompanying this process with financing, knowledge, articulation capacity, and a deep conviction um, as to the improvement of the rural world. The and this will yield results, good results for the rural field, but also for the whole region of Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you. Thank you very much for your message, Elisa Montalvo, Vice President of Cooperation, Alliances, and Mobilization. Most definitely, prosperity must arrive to the rural world of Latin America and the Caribbean. Let us continue with this opening session. We want to invite Ms. Ana Covarrubias, President of the Colegio de México, so that she can address us. Go ahead. Thank you so much. Good morning. Um, Thank you, Sergio Silva, the head of the Unit of Economic Development. And thank you, Secretary Jimenez Morales. Welcome, Alicia Montalvo, now Vice President of CAF. And please relay my greetings to Emilio Uquillas. I would like to thank you for being here, those of us who join us remotely as well. It is a pleasure to be here with you in the launching of the 2026 report on economy and development, roots for the future, the new real world of Latin America and the Caribbean. For the Colegio de Mexico, the collaboration with the Ministry of Economy and CAF is invaluable. It strengthens the Latin American vocation of our institution in terms of research and humanities and social sciences. This liaison highlights our conviction to leverage scientific knowledge to transform our societies and to promote better understanding of the problems um, uh, that, that that affect Latin America and the Caribbean. The purpose of this is informing new policies that can bring about better conditions for our region. The cross-disciplinary approach that this institution has, engaging different stakeholders, allows for discussion and an analysis that can bring about good knowledge and actionable insights in Mexico and Latin America. This report on economy and development invites us to look at the rural world in Latin America, not just from the historical shortcomings perspective, but also as a strategic provider of foods, a supplier of foods, and as a key actor in the energy transition. And where a great deal of the SDGs take place. Our institution has devoted more than 85 years to producing rigorous knowledge regarding the most complex problems in Latin America, convinced that the challenges that our countries face need to be seen interdisciplinary. This is why we also we try to engage in the conversation several stakeholders. These are conversations that are some of the most urgent in our times. There's a paradox that the report brings forward. Latin America and the Caribbean are the first exporters of food, yet they're sometimes the poorest ones. So something needs to be done about it. I just want to thank the Ministry of Economy once again for hosting us. I hope that this brings about a fruitful dialogue to understand the issues and needs that the rural world has. I hope um, that this leads us to actions that can improve the well-being of the sector and its inhabitants. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ana Covarrubias, President of Colegio de México. Before we continue with the panels and the presentation, we want our distinguished panelists to join us on taking an official picture. And also, Veronica Sancho, Knowledge Manager of CAF, and also Monica Grante to join us on stage to take that official picture. Thank you. I want to remind you that you can share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag RedCap. You can also follow us on X and Instagram. And now, yeah, the most special moment of the day, the presentation of the report on economy and development. Once again, Veronica Vicencio, Knowledge Manager of CAF. Can you please give a brief introduction? Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to the Mexican Economy Ministry. Thank you for hosting this report on economy and development, roots of the future. This is a flagship report, as Alicia was saying. This is the knowledge that we have gathered, put at the disposal as a public good for Latin America and the Caribbean. This is knowledge that we produce in the region for the region. Our researchers are based in the region and are well connected with the business areas in CAP, and they work around 2 years preparing the report. Something unique uh, about this report is that it has an agenda of policies put at the disposal of the region. There is a diagnosis made first, and we try to value and shed light upon the opportunities that the region has. These policy roadmaps are also very valuable, I believe, because they understand the region as a source of knowledge and it's set at the center of the planning. In the last 5 years, yeah, in the last CAF administration, uh, we've had a very well interconnected knowledge agenda. The main point being sustaining increasing growth in the region. In 2021, we focused on the importance of trade and infrastructure and our integration in value chains to foster growth in our countries. Mexico is a clear example as to the extra and intra-regional integration. In 2022, we focused not only on inequalities, but also how those are intergenerationally inherited and how the lack of opportunities persists over time, affecting mainly the main groups of families. In 2023 and 2024, we became the green bank of the region. And so we focused greatly on climatic issues and the opportunities of energy transition. We were some of the first to visualize this transition as a great opportunity for the region instead of just a challenge or a restriction for growth. In 2025, the report focused on the role of local and regional governments, which are fundamental. Mexico is just an example of that. And they're fundamental to potentialize growth. We face several bottlenecks regarding the capacities across Latin America and the Caribbean. And so basically, we focused on that. We start this new cycle with the red roots for the future, which, as we said, focuses on putting agriculture at the center as a driver for growth and innovation in the region. I don't want to spoil the report for you, but I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts and insights before the actual presentation of the report. I think it's clear that rural territories will be a driver of, of wealth. We have critical minerals, rare earths, agricultural and farming capacities, and the capacity to generate clean energy. This is a very rich region that will be able to supply that wealth uh, to fuel that development in future decades. Now, the new rural world has a strong farming component, but there's also a diversification of productive activities. Alicia already mentioned the agricultural and farming strategy. This basically shows the will that CAF has to bet on rural territories as a driver for innovation and growth. In rural areas hold a great deal of the population that still lives underserved. They still face gaps when it comes to connectivity, access to basic services. And despite the improvements over time regarding the bridging of the poverty gap, there's still a long stretch to go. Many of the improvements we've seen in latest decades have to do with the conditioned transfer programs. Mexico is the spearhead in this regard, and focusing on rural areas really closed a lot of the gaps. However, this historical lag still prevails, and so we need to start investing, bearing in mind other transitions, such as the demographic one, which also affects the execution of the projects to come in rural areas. I think that a key message to understand the report is identifying the wealth in the rural world is not enough. We need to take a step further. These opportunities for knowledge will materialize into projects that require long-term investments with high risk, and that will require the collaboration not only of the private sector and the state, but also organis- uh, multilateral bodies. These territories, as I said, undergo these gaps or these lagging And so the report wants to bring together the productive and the social, closing social gaps. And it's not a competition between goals. I mean, both are crucial in order to have the desired growth so that all of these opportunities finally land and materialize into projects. I believe that the roadmap focusing on social inclusion will be fundamental so that we don't perceive this closing of the gaps as a cost, but rather as an investment. Once again, thank you so much for joining us on this launch. This is the end of an era. A 2-year investigation process finishes, but this is just the start of a dialogue with other territories and countries, with the governments in our region, with the private sector, and we believe that the point of hosting this event is providing this product to you to start fostering dialogue and translating this into concrete actions in the following cycle. Thank you so much. Enjoy. Thank you very much for this great introduction, Veronica Sancho, Manager of Knowledge of CAF. And indeed, let's move on with the report. I want to welcome Maria Dolores de Mata and Juan Odrizola. Both are the principal economists at the Directorate of Social Economic Investigations. They will be presenting the 2026 report on economy and development, Roots of the Future, the New Rural World of Latin America and the Caribbean. Please come on stage. Round of applause. Please take a seat. Now, we briefly want to introduce you to Dolores and Juan. Dolores has a PhD in economy from the Carlos III University of Madrid. She has a master in economy from the Carlos III, and she is a bachelor in economy by the University of Cordoba. Juan has a PhD in economy by the Arizona State University and a master in international economy uh, from the Universidad de Uruguay. She is a bachelor in economy by ORB Uruguay. Um, Welcome. Thank you. It is a pleasure to address you and present the new report on economy and development, Roots for the Future, the new rural world for Latin America and the Caribbean. This report invites us to rethink the role of the rural realm in the development of the region. These rural areas host a richness of strategic resources. We have fertile land for food production. We have half of the biodiversity, a quarter of the forests in the world, and almost a third of the copper reserves in the world, as well as water resources. There are around 147 heritage sites, many of which are here in Mexico. And this reality, however, also coexists uh, with the lag. As 40% of the poor live in rural areas in the region. There's also a lack of access to basic infrastructure and services. Less than half of the population has access to internet, and almost 50% of the people have deficiencies in sanitation systems. In a context where there's an increasing demand for food, I mean, we're currently undergoing an energy transition, and there are new technological opportunities that could drive better sustainability. This could also represent new opportunities to improve the quality of life of the inhabitants of the rural realm. The changes that have been already occurring must be doubled down to improve the well-being of the population. We need a series of well-articulated policies that potentialize this future of opportunities as well as closing the gaps. Basically, the report is split into two. The first section deals with the transformations in the region and the opportunities that we've identified. The second section covers the areas of action as well as policy guidelines. Now, let's dig into the first section first, which is in turn divided into four. First, we're going to cover the farming sector, the main productive force in the rural realm. We're also going to cover non-agricultural uh, production as well as basic services. Let's start with the farming industry. At the beg- at the middle of last century, 60% of the population was dedicated to agriculture and farming. In 2023, only 16% of the population does any farming or agriculture as a means of livelihood. The role of the farming sector in the region, however, has remained more or less stable. The weight of the farming sector in economies went from 9 to 6, and so this highlights that this is still a very important sector for the region. Now, if we add to that the processing of primary goods, the agro industry, we see that the weight that this represents in regions is even greater, almost 10%. In Mexico, agriculture and livestock farming, along with industry, more or less account for 7%. And the all of the countries that we have data from, for all of them, the weight is pretty significant, highlighting the importance of these sectors for the economies of the region. The role of the region as a food supplier to the rest of the world. Now, this chart shows how, from 2000 to recent years, the region has been the main net exporter of foods in the world. 1 out of every $5 that enter the region come from the agricultural and farming sector. Mexico is the third net exporter of foods, only overcome by Brazil and Argentina. However, despite the improvements in productivity, there's still a lot to do. If we talk about labor productivity or how many dollars are generated per worker, if we compare Europe and Central Asia to Latin America, they are at double. And considering North America, then they are 10 times even above. So there is still a long stretch to go. The book analyzes all of the components that explain these differences in productivity thoroughly and how things have evolved throughout Latin America and the Caribbean over the years. First, let's talk about a capital adoption. We see that the net capital stock per worker is almost 12 times larger in Europe than in Latin America and almost 37 times greater in North America. Therefore, the importance of adopting more capital and double down on advancements in irrigation, for example. From 1961 to this day, this has been the the fastest growing region in terms of uh, irrigation infrastructure. Throughout the book, you're going to find QR codes that will redirect you and show you the role of CAF in all of this. In terms of irrigation, we can highlight the project Mi Riego in Bolivia that aims to streamline these operations through technology. This productive units universe is very diverse in terms of the practices, technology, and the size of the productive units. In the region, almost 80% of the productive units are less than 20 hectares, and only 6% have more than 100 hectares. If we look at this in terms of surface, the small productive units only make up for 4% of the territory, while the greater ones account for 86%. As I said, the rural world is incorporating more and more sectors, not only the farming or agricultural ones. This is a world where the energy transition is up and going. And so this wealth and resources could transform this region into a crucial stakeholder for future years to come. We're thinking about clean energy, and we believe that the region could be a key actor in future years, ensuring clean energy generation. We can also highlight the advancements in the region in terms of green hydrogen. There were 132 projects in different stages of development throughout the region. 54% of these projects are in rural areas. This fuel is greatly important because of its versatility. It is expected that in the following 30 years, the demand for this fuel will um, grow fourfold. Other important sectors for the rural world are the following. However, their weight is different depending on the area. We have nature-based business, which accounts for almost one-fifth of the carbon market financing. We have a forestry sector, which accounts for more than 20% of the exports of Uruguay. We have aquaculture and fishery, which has doubled its participation in the world production in later years. Tourism, specifically cultural tourism, which currently accounts for 40% of the world tourism. And of course, value chains. We want to highlight the role of women across value chains. Continuing with the description that one made regarding the transformations in the rural world, let's now describe the other transformations that have occurred in terms of population and social regards. We wanted to show you an updated picture as to how this transformation has occurred in later decades. These are some of the most relevant data. The demography of rural populations is different now. This is the weight of the rural population with regards to the global population. By the middle of the last century, more than half of the world's population lived in rural areas. Now it's around 18%. Mexico has one-fourth of the rural population of Latin America and the Caribbean. And so Also, the characteristics of these populations have changed. The rural population is now older. 10% of the population is older than 65. There's been a decline in fertility. It's the same that's happening in the urban realm, the same is happening in the rural realm. It is good news in the sense that teenage pregnancy has also declined. There have been important changes in migration patterns. Usually, rural areas had been um, places of origin where people would migrate outside of them. But now migration flows have been offset. And so, in the case of Chile, for instance, inflowing populations into the rural areas is exceeding the outflowing um, population. And based on this, we need to reconsider the policies for the future. The rural population has shown certain indicators that mean that there have been improvements. The poverty rate, for instance, has been reduced. However, 1 out of 3 people in rural areas is poor. This is double the rate than in urban um, realms. Regarding sources of income and livelihoods, nowadays there is greater diversification in jobs. Agriculture is still crucial and central for rural workers. However, it started being 53% of the employment, and now it's fallen to 43% of the employment. This means that more than half of rural workers are now working in non-agricultural sectors such as industry, transportation, etc. And the trends show an increase for the future. We also break down the sources of income of rural households, and we show how rural vulnerability is associated to low diversification and greater dependence on agricultural sources. Wealthier households within the rural realm are less dependent on farming and agriculture and are more diversified. And regarding this characterization of the sources of income for rural workers, it's worth highlighting the vulnerability of jobs. 7 out of 10 rural workers work informally. E- Even more so, the farming workers. So it is one of the challenges to address because informality increases vulnerability. This informality includes non-registered waged workers, um, a- and also non non-remuneration jobs, especially when it comes to women. 1 out of 5 women works in a productive activity without receiving any wage. Finally, the expansion of basic services and utilities in rural realms. We prioritize services that are crucial for the well-being of the population as well as for production. I'm not going to dig into each of these, but you can more or less see In green, we have electricity. That is the basic service that has been spreading the most, reaching almost a universal coverage in the countries that we analyzed. Then we have water and sanitation. These are essential services that have relatively low coverage and are still far from universal. Then you can see the rest of the sectors, such as physical connectivity, digital connectivity, health and education, and financial services. Those are in yellow because things differ from country to another. Some countries have achieved a great spread of these services. However, given the diversity of context, there's no heterogeneity. Now, regarding the access to good quality services, the outlook is a bit more standardized. There is still a lot of lags across countries. It's not only about access, but the quality of those services. This is a rural accessibility index. 66% of the rural population lives less than 2 kilometers away from a main road. Now, these roads, only 40% of those roads are paved. And it's worth highlighting CAF's action to close the gaps when it comes to accessing the services. There are plenty of projects for connectivity, for instance, in Paraguay, to connect agricultural areas with ports. And so there's still plenty of room for opportunity and to improve. So, as we see, great challenges, great opportunities, persistent lags, which opens up the discussion to creating better policies. I'm briefly going to discuss the areas of action and policy guidelines. This will be split into three blocks. First, actions that heading towards a more sustainable productive sector, then improving the quality of life of rural inhabitants, and finally, access to quality services. All of these actions go hand in hand with the agricultural prosperity strategy that was launched last year, which seeks sustainability and regeneration among these sectors to fight uh, food insecurity in the region and globally. Sustainable productive sectors. You've already mentioned them. We have the farming and agricultural sector, mining, low carbon fuels, forestry, fishing. They all face transversal challenges that require transversal action. The necessary conditions for these productive systems to take place are basic services, property rights, and diversified access to financing and insurance. CAF plays an important role to channel resources to the rural world. The coffee production project in Honduras, for instance, seeks to improve the quality of life of the producers of this raw material there. Now, It is also important to have good natural resource management and governance. And so a great ally is certification and traceability, which allows for a better governance and better productivity. It adds value and it allows for access to international markets. And for all of this to be possible, it is necessary to educate and train the rural workers and provide them with the right technology. Now, regarding the farming and agriculture sector, this book covers three main blocks, and they are all interlinked. First, we have modernization. We've talked about improvements to productivity. These improvements also allow for improvements in sustainability and also advancing in value chains and opening up to the market. Uh, Maybe we can highlight the case of CARICOM, which has advanced in the integration of its members and has concrete measures uh, sec- uh, to secure food. In terms of mining and fuel, we identified two areas of action. Mining and fuel generation are very demanding activities, and so there needs to be a good resource governance to reduce local impacts. And the benefits of these activities must be extended to local communities. We're talking about royalties in mining, etc., and development and modernization, electrification in mining processes, using renewable energies for low carbon production. All of that improves sustainability, but they also help to reduce the impacting natural resources. Now, as for forestry, there needs to be a long-term policy. We're talking about more than 7 years cycles. And so we need to have tax incentives and legal certainty to promote these activities. The region is advancing in a forest management markets. And now let's talk about fishery. One of the main problems is illegal fishing and overfishing, which is why it's important to invest in resources and labor to better manage this activity. This is a sector that hasn't been developed yet in the region and it has great potential. These are great, clean, nutritious products and they're crucial for food security in the area. There's a need for better technology and training of the rural population. As for tourism, we have the medium to long-term tourist plans, community-based and rural-based tourism. Um, there's currently a lack of a measuring and record keeping in community-based tourism, and so that needs to be dealt with. The second axis of action that the report proposes has to do with the improvement of the quality of life. To reduce vulnerability, support strategies are needed, as well as increasing the productive capacity of this area and diversification. A great deal of the vulnerable population lives in rural areas. So we need to strengthen wage sustenance mechanisms, especially focusing on vulnerable populations such as the elderly or indigenous groups. We have the conditioned uh, income transfers, the non-contributional pensions, and regarding the uh, the improvement of the uh, job insertion of the population, we saw a need to uh, connect people with better quality jobs and more diversified jobs. Informal jobs are plentiful, and so this is not an easy task, but it is important to orient policies and articulate them with strategic sectors that will be more dynamic in the future. Also, job formalization, abiding by regulations, keeping compliance. In Uruguay, with the institutional strengthening in collective bargaining, a reduction of informality rates have been achieved. Also, gender gaps. Gender gaps are huge in rural areas, and so a wide array of policies is needed. Things addressing the the excessive burden that women face, of course, strengthening human capital is crucial. Attracting also professionals and training, and bringing more medical experts to the territories, building new schools that reach even the most isolated populations, so it is possible to expand with innovation without ignoring digital gaps. Now, the third point of the roadmap has to do with uh, a quality service access in rural territories. There is a wide array of sectors that we covered, and some of the main ones have to do with access to quality services. First, it's important to identify demand. We have some units that are low in production, are highly vulnerable, and struggle accessing to basic services such as financial services, as well as financial services and internet. And so that needs to be differentiated from the supply, which focuses on investment, coordination, regulation, and incentives. Investment, public and private, coordination across sectors, This is a very important point. Strengthening regional government capacities and regulation incentives. And this is the end of our roadmap. You're going to be able to see more in the report. Just a final reflection. This integrated roadmap engages several stakeholders, the private sector, the public sector, communities, and within the private sector, national and subnational levels of government. This also involves institutions such as CAF, which channels financing and produces knowledge. Thank you for your attention. And here are the QR codes for the report and the prosperity strategy. Please, round of applause once again for Juan Sola and Maria Dolores de Mata because it was very informative. The report is incredible. You can read it calmly at home. I think you all have your copy. You can also download it from the QR code, and it will also be available in the CAF webpage. Please don't miss it. It is a very illustrative. Thank you very much for this reflections, this insights, and the clarity with which you shared. Before following, before continuing with the next panel, we want the SEDATU Secretary of Zoning and Ordering to give us a couple of remarks. Hello. First of all, I would like to thank the Ministry of Economy for receiving us in these facilities, and also thank you to the Colegio de Mexico for facilitating the organization of this event. Thank you, Julio de Armas, Emilio Urquillas, for your consideration, and thank you everyone for joining us. I apologize, the original program was not as it is right now. I was going to participate in another panel, but actually I have to leave early, unfortunately. So thank you for your consideration and thank you for opening up this space so that I can transmit this message. Uh, on behalf of Dr. Navegas, the Secretary of Urban and Rural Territory Development, thank you. SEDATU is in charge of putting in practice any territorial policies. It is a special ministry. It has one foot in the rural realm and another foot in the urban realm. And this interaction between sectors makes our work so relevant. Let me provide some context about the rural sector in this country and its history. Mexico, around 70% of its territory is common land or ejido. Currently, 62% is constituted by this nuclei. Now, for farming in Mexico also has an important component, which is the property regime. The farming sector after the Mexican Revolution underwent changes. The communities were given the land that they lost after the colonial times. So throughout 80 or 90 years, redistribution of the land was done. And so that is how we arrived to this point where 62% of the territory belongs to uh, farmers. This property regime is enshrined in our constitution, and so it's designed so that it's not easy to change this common land property to prevent any abuses of power. Now, on the one hand, this is a great opportunity. We have great proportions of land under the purview of well-identified groups. And so it's easy to coordinate in that sense. But at the same time, we face great pressure because this communal regime also poses certain limitations regarding property rights and legal certainty. A couple of minutes ago, Juan Odriozola mentioned how this change has occurred in the population. You know, this transition from the rural to the urban. 50 years ago, the region was around 50% rural, but now it's only 18% rural. And probably one of the factors has been the increase in productivity of the a lack of productivity in the fields. Most of the migrations towards the urban have been triggered because of a lack of investment and for a lack of capacity that the rural sector has had. And so today we are facing a great challenge because of the abandonment of this agricultural activities. It has been a gradual change in terms of use of land. Urban sprawl has also been on the rise. And so if we bring all together, we see that the rural realm in our country is very neglected. First, because of this lack of certainty, legal certainty, because of the regime, but also because of the changes in land use. What is the problem that we're facing today? 80% of growth since the 80s has occurred through urban sprawling, irregular urban sprawling and settlements. And we're trying to solve that problem still. The loss of productivity in the rural world has uh, increased. Mexico has become a more urban based producer. And so the rural realm is less and less relevant in the sources of income of our country and in the production of our country. There are unfavorable conditions in the rural world in Mexico. When you go to common land, you see that new generations have a different vision. They are not so deeply rooted in their land and they're not interested in producing agricultural goods. The old people would work the fields, but the newer generations don't have that interest anymore. They want to migrate to an urban area where they can find other alternatives and other um, quality of life. And looking for short-term income, that is the uh, most severe problem. In Sedatu, in the ministry, we deal with the agricultural sector, but also with urban sprawling and new settlements. And so this concerns us greatly because this phenomenon cannot be stopped from the public sector only. This is a cultural problem that has a lot to do with other factors that we've been seeing throughout the region and in the world. There are now ideals of what life should look like, and they're not compatible with the rural world. And so there's a dissociation between the territorial reality and people's aspirations. These differences are not standardized across the country. We have some areas that are highly productive. For instance, in Sinaloa, uh, at the northwest of the country, they are the most productive entity, competing with some of the most productive areas in the world. Um, Something similar happens in Jalisco, mm, Michoacan, for instance, with the avocados. But at the same time, within the same states and across the country, we have other areas that were originally devoted to production that are far more rural than urban, and they have very low productivity. And they are very fragmented in terms of land property and also uh, they lack access to financing means to enhance production. The south of the country is the clearest example, whereas Sinaloa has great amounts of land that are very productive. In Oaxaca, parcels are very tiny, perhaps 2 hectares. And so the possibility to leverage scale economies is non-existent. Now, to that, we add the cultural complexity. The South has a lot of ethnical uh, diversity and fragmentation as well. The state of Oaxaca alone has 500 municipalities, and so all of this adds layers of complexity. We must understand these problems not only from the perspective of productivity, but from a broader lens. What are the alternatives that field inhabitants have? There are very few. And so that explains disinterest to push for better productive processes and for farming, aquaculture, agriculture. And so there's an increasing will to transform the use of land to a more urban one. And this has led to a loss of property for generations. We must understand field work from a holistic perspective. What are we doing in Sedatu? The federal government has different agencies with different capacities to intervene. We have direct investment, for instance, uh, but we are pushing two specific programs that can trigger virtuous cycles. First, we have a program to generate legal certainty in farm and nuclei. A great deal of common lands don't have the legal certainty as to the limits or boundaries of the property or the rights of the people, of the owners. This will help us not only for legal certainty within the communities, but also to generate the conditions so that there is more room for financing and the introduction of new technologies in the fields, as well as coordination across community members within this very community. Sometimes there's no possibility to discuss what can be done to bring about this scale economy. Now, we're, these projects were also mentioned in the final part of the report of CAF. Now, the second project has to do with better access to housing. We have a self a housing self-production program. In the urban areas, we think about vertical housing, access to utilities, connectivity, but in the fields or in the rural world, things are different. We want rural housing to meet standards, the UN standards. These are seven components that go from affordability, access to services, location, etc. And what we're seeking with this self-production program is that community work can push for construction and while ensuring the quality of these housing complexes. And also support communities to highlight the value of their production and try to revert this short-term vision of abandoning the fields, losing the identity of the fields, and losing this tradition and losing the pride in field work. And there's also the gender perspective. Historically speaking, in Mexico, the landowners in rural areas are men. This has changed over time, but there's still an important gap when it comes to decision making, access to legal certainty, financing. There's a gap between men and women in the rural realm. So I think that another important uh, approach should be strengthening this the equality between men and women so that more and more women can be landowners and And in general, we want to foster the sense of belonging and uprooting and the rooting to the land. Once again, thank you to CAF and thank you, everyone. We are at your disposal. Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary of Land Use and Housing. We want to continue with our following panel on public policies. And I want to invite Veronica Amarante on stage, investigator of CAP. She will be the moderator. And of course, our distinguished panelists, Jose Antonio Cortez, General Director of Business Promotion, FIRA, Kirsten Appendini, researcher of Colegio de México, and Javier Delgado, an expert in rural financing. Dear Veronica, the floor is yours. Go ahead. Where's Kirsten? Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel. So the idea here is based on the 2026 report on economy and development. We want to share some insights based on our experiences, our research. We have this wonderful experts in the panel, and we're going to split this panel into uh, two blocks of questions. Please try to be mindful of time, 5 minutes per speaker. Without further ado, first question for Jose Antonio González Sarrientos, the Deputy Director of Business Promotion, FIDA. So the red says that despite the advancements, there's still a lack of access to financing in the rural realm. There are low levels of formalization and there's productive heterogeneity across the region. What are the main challenges to consolidate rural credit markets and what type of risks prevail? Hello, good morning, thank you. So I'm going to split my answer into two. On the one hand, we have financing supply, and on the other, the financing demand. In Mexico, to finance agro, well, we see that this is a very powerful market. Banks and non-bank institutions, and each of these face a different challenge. For the banks, they are interested in agro industry. So the challenge with banks is completely different in comparison to cooperatives that are much more focalized on marginalized areas. we've been working to provide more knowledge and training to this more neglected areas. But as I was saying, each of these intermediaries visualize potential risks differently. For instance, climate change, price volatility, land tenure. And so the challenge is mitigating these risks through financial instruments. I believe that there's a reasonable amount of instruments and intermediaries that can uh, address the production. Now, let's talk about demand. What if we imagine a market where 100% of the producers were uh, uh, for self-consumption? Would they be eligible for financing? Why am I making this question? Well, because I think that the main challenge it has to be split in depending on the producer that we're talking about. What do I mean? Policies don't necessarily have to be financing policies. In Mexico, we have 1.6 agro production units, but from those 1.6 million, some are for self-consumption and others are for production. And so, in the self-consumption regard, we have to assess what policies can we implement to bring the producers to the market. Not necessarily financing, because then you're going to make them less productive. They don't have sources to pay, and so it's a snowball. Now, the remnant. What needs to happen so that the rest of the producers that are not self-consumption, how do we take them to the market and how do we make them eligible to financing? Mexico is at a heterogeneous market, and we need to address it um, in a personalized way. Mm, In Mexico, we have productive land of 5 hectares, but then in Brazil, they have like 8 hectares. And so the main challenge is how to make those small producers more productive, those producers that have the possibility to go into the market. In FIDA, we don't only provide financing with guarantees for land tenure or long-term financing. We also provide technical assistance. We have 5 technological development centers that allow for us to give more technology to these people so that they are more eligible for financing and better trained. So providing better seeds, how to use fertilizer in a more effective way, and those are some of the options to mitigate risk and addressing the challenge, to take them to the market. Okay, thank you. Thank you for these insights as to the heterogeneity across institutions and producers. Now, Kirsten Appendini, a researcher of Colegio de México. The red posits that the rural world has a great wealth and potential opportunities to get into the market. But those positive aspects also coexist with lags and gaps. In recent years, the demography has changed in rural areas. So we wanted to know from your perspective as a researcher, where is the main bottleneck so that these assets become Territorial development, and how can these strategies adapt to demographic changes and in job structures? Thank you for your invitation. It is quite complex to answer to that question. Well, so many questions. I'm going to start with a concerning matter for me. Mexico is the third largest exporter in Latin America in terms of agricultural resources. But Mexico is also importer. Mexico imports a great deal of its basic foods. Mexico doesn't have food security. The imports that arrive in Mexico are mostly uh, corn. In the latest 2025 statistics, we see that corn expo corn imports have increased. The same goes for wheat, rice imports, and that is concerning because in the last 2 years, white corn imports have increased. This type of corn is basically the main food that Mexicans consume. So I believe that it's crucial to have programs that deal with food security and strengthen it, especially when it comes to corn. Introducing new technologies. This is necessary to um, provide certainty to the Mexican population. Now, this also has to do with generational change. It's important to train younger generations to apply the new technologies for agriculture and to get them interested in agricultural production and train them not only in the use of new technologies but also in handling the different parts of the supply chain. And in order to achieve this generational change, we need to look at property rights, especially in common lands or ejidos. Jose Rechete from Sedatu already explained the outlook of the current situation. He explained what common lands and ejidos were. most of the small producers are in the ejidos or common lands. So this generational change will have to do a lot with property rights, the access to land, and the access to natural resource assets. Of course, this has to do with demographics, job opportunities, and means of livelihood. In Mexico, the average of common land of commoners are 65 years of age, and the common land surface covers 51% of, of the territory. Well, I'm not really sure about this number because Jose Irachete said it was 72%. You know, we need to re revise that, but there's a need to look at this property rights to provide more opportunities for farmers and introduce new technology. Now, creating more activities throughout the agro-food chain would bring about more jobs. And this the problem is that these proposals have not been taken seriously or officially. They have just been informally mentioned. It is also important to uh, remunerate senior farmers, um, something that allows for a dignified retirement. And a program like this needs financing. Now, the status of women regarding property. Nowadays, the participation of women has increased, as well as their access to property rights. Around 33% of commoners are women. Okay, I'm sorry. We need to move on to the next panel. Oh, sorry, I did not answer the other question. That's okay. Okay, so Javier Delgado, expert in rural financing. The development of the rural world requires advancing towards a deeper, more diversified condition. How can the financial system contribute to catalyzing that transformation? And what is needed uh, for this diversification? And what are the limitations today to scale up that financing? Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And I would like to acknowledge the presenters and the researchers that launched the report on economy and development. I think it's worth highlighting that in Mexico, microfinancing, the microfinancer businesses are only 14.5% of businesses receive microfinancing. In the agricultural realm, even less. According to the National Banking Commission, in the rural realm, there's only 7%. This is a market phenomenon where we need to look at both sides, the supply and demand of financing. I've been looking at these things for 52 years. Basically, it's a joint effort, not just financially, but also training, uh, technification, and developing the demand. We have been trying to bring the supplies as close as we can to the demanders. There are many uh, branches, however. In 1995, we conducted research on rural financial markets, and we did it again in 2003, and we found the very same picture that you just presented. The supply um, has not arrived at the hands that need it the most. So for me, the main challenge is bringing it closer to the producers. Now, the type of financial product, we have a standard, but I believe that it's important to customize um, financial products. eh, And if we want the producers to have a vertical integration, we need to see what the market demands and then act. I work closely with Walmart Foundation. Walmart work on pro produce production, and they buy the product from the producers and they provide immediate payment, not in 90 days time, but immediately. But most importantly, they provide training to everyone involved in the value chain. And right now, what we're doing is assessing the possibility to provide training to the uh, sons of the producer so that they don't migrate away from the fields. We are trying to show them that it is a good business to stay in the field and farming with prosperous conditions. Thank you. Now, the second round of questions. Please try to be more brief in your answers. This is a question for Jose Antonio regarding financing and sustainability and inclusion. FIDA has implemented such an approach to modernize the sector and push for productivity and improve the quality of life of rural territories? How can financial instruments incentivize productivity and sustainability in producers of different scales, especially in those of the lower scale? Okay, in FIDA, we've seen two possible alternatives. We either punch them or we give them a carrot. I'm, of course, kidding, but of course, punching doesn't get us anywhere really. But we have developed a series of programs. There's a program called Sustenta Más. We look at the level of degradation of the land, biologically, chemically, or physically speaking. And what we do is incentivize the reduction of chemical fertilizers without hindering production. In fact, production can actually be increased by 6%. And so, with this reduction of chemical fertilizer, they also get a 3% reimbursement in the financing rate. For small and middle scale producers. Um, and also, apart from that 3%, uh, we provide m- financial support to purchase biofertilizers around 2,500 pesos per hectare. So in FIDA, we're not only providing financing, but also we're linking that to an incentive. And we close this with technical assistance. We have more than 1,000 technical advisors nationwide, and so they provide training to the producers, and that is just an example. Here's the next question. What policies or approaches are more effective to close social inclusion gaps in these territories? Go ahead. So I think that there should be good rapport to implement policies in each of these locations, and they have to consider the needs of each local population. For instance, rural activities by women in agricultural land or community-based tourism. Uh, Vulnerable populations have to participate in this activity. There's another successful case, a group of indigenous women that created a body to uh, look after native corn seeds, the cuidadoras at the south of Mexico. This has expanded regionally. This type of organization has expanded regionally, which means that it's had the possibility to scale. And so that is a good example that can be replicated. Now, there's been a lot of focus on, and also regarding the youth. I think that the youth needs more support with programs that can, support for the youth with employment programs, because currently the youth has mostly informal jobs. And so what we're lacking is formal options for the younger populations and something linked to the resources of the communities or agricultural communities, and providing training in new technologies such as wind farming or solar farming. Excellent. Great. Thank you. One last question for Javier Delgado. What are the recent opportunities? What are the standards for sustainability, traceability? And the question is, what's the role of financing to facilitate the integration and escalation of producers in global chains? Well, again, we need to really customize the solutions. For instance, we have the responsibility fund. They provided financing to a company that was already integrated to the market, but they're also providing the capacity to modernize and have better traceability, end-to-end traceability. These types of measures can be taken when there's already an export market and certain expectations need to be met. And so I think that technical advisory is also very positive. Providing these trainings is very positive. Also, showing the alternatives in primary production is important. Fertilizers, their price has been spiking, but PETA is now demonstrating that they can reduce chemical fertilizers and introduce new bio fertilizers with better yields. And so there's better profitability in that. And we know that thanks to the research. So it's all about customizing the options. And it's not just the financial aspect, but also training and technology, which becomes permanent. As Jose Antonio was saying, they have more than 1,000 technicians. who accompany each project and provide training for this to become more solid. Thank you very much. Now I would like to thank all of the panelists. Please, let's give them a round of applause. And now we will move on to the closure of the event. And dear Dr. Veronica, please don't leave. We're going to take an official picture. And once again, let's give a round of applause to this great panel with Jose Antonio Cortez, the General Director of Business Promotion for FIRA, Cristina Pendini, a researcher of the Colegio de México, and Javier Delgado, an expert in rural financing. Thank you for your insights and sharing your experience. And as Veronica said, everything that starts has to end. And now comes the closure of this great event. Veronica Visancho, the knowledge manager of CAF, and Sergio Silva, the economic intelligence leader at the Ministry of Economy. Could you please come forward? Let's give the floor to Monica Visancho, the knowledge manager of CAF. Thank you for everyone who stuck around. It's been a pleasure to share this new baby of ours to contribute to knowledge generation in the region. Now, please check it out. There's also a summary in the web page. I believe that it will be very useful to consult and then to adapt to each of the realities of each territory. I want to thank Juan Orozcola and Dolores de la Mata, the editors of the report, and also Belén Cañuelo, the project manager from the beginning. Thank you once again, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Veronica. Now we'll give the floor to Sergio Silva, the head of the Economic Intelligence Unit at the Ministry of Economy, to close this event. Thank you. Good morning once again. I would like to start by thanking the CAF team for this presentation. And I would also like to thank everyone who engaged in the discussion. I just want to highlight three takeaways. Of course, we need to change our approach. Start looking at the rural world as a potential driver of growth and review our public policies. These public policies won't materialize by themselves. We need to articulate and engage with different sectors and territories. It's not only about identifying potential, but building the conditions to achieve results. And territorial development cannot be peripheral matter. If we want to grow, territorial development must be at the center of the economic strategy. Uh, in the Ministry of Economy, we value this conversation because it connects with a broader agenda, how to strengthen productive capacities, how to better integrate value chains, and how to generate opportunities across the country. The point is that this should not be left here. We need to translate them into concrete actions And the collaboration with CAF opens up the road for future collaboration. Thank you once again. Thank you to CAF, and thank you for participating, everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Silva. And with this, we now adjourn this session. This was the presentation of the 2026 Report on Economy and Development, Roots for the Future. As our distinguished guests have already mentioned, we invite you to review the report. We're sure it will be valuable. And once again, we would like to thank all of the participants, face to face and virtually too. Please follow us on social media, and you can also download the report. On behalf of the Ministry of Economy and on behalf of the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, we would like to thank you for joining us and have a great day. See you soon.